Appalachia, the word that evokes a whole passel of reactions. Everything from the beauty of a mountaintop to trailer parks, drugs, and about everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are indeed the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch from eastern Canada through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. The folks that live in these mountains have faced an unending number of tragic and just plain odd happenings that cry out for the telling. Hello, I'm Larry Bentley, and I was born and raised in these very mountains by a family who themselves were born and raised and even lived for generations in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Come with me and we'll take a look at some of the unending stories that come from within my beloved mountains. And we'll look through the eyes of an Appalachian at some outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 5 of Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. Hello, my good friends. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for stopping by. Now, on March 22nd, 1914, a little old lady was arrested on a train in southern Colorado for her work in fighting for the coal miners on strike in that area. That would be the second time she was arrested in the same labor dispute. She just got out after being arrested by the state militia in Trinidad and sent to Denver, where she'd been released. They apparently took her away from the miners she supported and told her to get lost, thinking that she was the one old lady and wouldn't go back. She went just as fast and straight as she could go, right back to the same coal fields, daring the mine owners and the rent-a-cops to arrest her all over again. Now, that was just another day at the office for her, but in reality, it was a real sacrifice that she made in the second half of her life as she fought for the miners who were treated and with less compassion by mine owners than the tools they used. That was back in the late 19th and early 20th century here in America. Now, she was an Irish housewife who didn't have much to do with any political activism for the most part of her life. Now, once she hit middle age and decided to jump in, she made it count and turned into a thorn in the side agitator for mining labor rights. Now, she'd already survived after her husband and all four of her children died of yellow fever in Memphis. Then, her only means of support after that she had left, which was her dress shop, burned to the ground in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. And remember, there wasn't no government welfare back then of any kind. And once she jumped into it, she really hit home and became the voice of mine workers, mainly in the Appalachian coal country of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Now, she pulled mine workers' unions so tightly together that her effect on them lasts to this very day. So come on in, call your mom and them, set a spell, and let me tell you about it. No doubt the most famous female labor activist of the 19th century was a lady named Mary Harris Jones, or as many of us in Appalachia know her, Mother Jones. She referred to herself as a natural-born hellraiser when it came to the flat-out safety and rights of mine workers. She was thought of as being a radical, or so radical, in fact, that the U.S. Attorney referred to her as the most dangerous woman in America. Of course, radical back then was having hard hats and other types of safety equipment, which was what they referred to as normal today, that along with having a decent wage to make a living out of. Other radical thought was that it just might be a good idea to put more value on a human life than on the tools or even the mules that they used in their jobs. If a tool got broke or a mule injured, a man would likely be fired. If a man got hurt or killed, the new person they hired would be there to fill his place and would be there so fast they'd almost step on the one they replaced. All while the company was over at the dead employee's house breaking the news to the family, all while they packed up their stuff and threw them out on the spot, because after all, the new guy'd got to have a place to come home to. Apparently, you were nothing but a number if you worked in the mines back then. Now, Mary Harris was born on August 1st, 1930 in County Cork, Ireland. The Harris family migrated to Toronto, Canada when Mother was 5. That was ahead of the Great Potato Famine, which resulted in great numbers of Irish immigrants who either had to leave or starve to death, one or the other. Now, once she was old enough, she went to work as a teacher in a Michigan Catholic school. Then, like all of us, she wanted to be everything she could, so she found something that she was good at and opened a seamstress shop in Chicago where she actually did very well. She moved to Memphis for a another teaching job, and because she had met the love of her life named George Jones. No, folks, that wasn't a possum. This George was a member of the Iron Molders Union. They were married, they had 4 children in the 6 years they were together, and they were loving life until 1867 when tragedy come knocking on the door like an Amway salesman. That's when her entire family was wiped out in a yellow fever epidemic. As a result of that, she dressed in black for the rest of her life. Now, being alone, Mother went back to Chicago where she picked up her sewing business again. We all know I wouldn't be sitting here talking if she lived happily ever after that. I say that because on October 8th, 1871, Ms. O'Leary's cow over on DeCoven Street kicked over a lantern in the O'Leary barn and set off the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Mother lost everything she had and barely survived, and at 41 years old, the poor woman had lived more than most 90-year-olds had. Now, being all alone, with pretty much nothing but the clothes on her back, she got a real good look at what poor, down and out, and starting at the bottom looked like. That led to her identifying with the working folks that didn't have protection against low wages, long hours, or dangerous working conditions. She found out that the business owners, aside from having dangerous workplaces, also had blacklists and used what they called strike breakers to intimidate workers and stop them from joining unions. After seeing all that and getting a good bit pissed about it, she started going over to the Knights of Labor Union meetings just to maybe have somebody to talk to or maybe get a little bit of her own moral support. But by 1877, she took up the cause of the working folks because she literally thought of them as family. Now, she started off first by making her fiery speeches and organizing in Pittsburgh, which was during the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. Now, that happened as a result of the B&O Railroad. Remember them? They're the ones that cut the route through the Appalachians for the first time. They had cut their wages for the third time in 1 year. Now, the strike spread to West Virginia, Illinois, Missouri, Maryland, and New York. Now, that was a major blow to the railroad companies in the form of shutting down all the railroad service from the East Coast to the Midwest. Now, back then, there wasn't any negotiating between parties. The railroad companies would just get mad and, like about every company that was facing a strike back in, went out and hired what were called strike breakers to come in and start killing folks, burning houses, and destroying property. And that's just the way it was back then. That strike lasted 52 days, and the goon squads of the railroad finally put down the uprising by killing about 100 people. If you ever wondered how her speeches went, look one up. They're just too long for me to quote during this episode, and you can't really get any context without reading the whole thing. But believe me, once you've heard it, there ain't no going back. Folks, she said things that must have knocked the owner's pickle in their watch pockets. She was just hard-nosed. She was determined, a lady that wasn't fixing to quit. She took part, but mostly led other strikes, including those that led to the Haymarket Riot in Chicago in 1886. Now, the Haymarket Riot took place in May 3rd and 4th of 1886. It all started out as workers protesting for an 8-hour workday, which just within a few hours of the 3rd, several police were injured and 2 protesters were dead. And on the 4th, they decided to hold the line and keep protesting. Everything was going along peacefully until somebody chunked a lit dynamite stick into the crowd and it went off. When the dynamite went off, things went from bad to worse. Both police, thinking they were under attack, and probably were, started shooting. 7 police officers were blown to bits, and 4 civilians who may or may not have been even strikers, were dead. Now, the idiots who conspired to do that were anarchists who were found, arrested, and convicted and hung for their trouble. Mother went on to even put another caravan of children together to march and protest of the evils of child labor. Yes, folks, child labor was perfectly legal in this country until 1938. And it wasn't just used, it was abused. Children were pulled out of schools and put to work in a whole passel of cases. She went to work organizing the miners of West Virginia and Colorado both. Now, the companies had come up with what they called jail deportation. That was a scheme where they'd arrest strikers, hauling them off to another state uncuff them and warn them to never come back, and then leave them standing in the middle of nowhere in another state. Kind of like the scene from What About Bob when Richard Dreyfuss hauls Bill Murray out into the Virginia Appalachians and leaves him standing there. That would be the reason that Mother was arrested that day in Chicago and hauled off, and they thought they had dealt with her. They put her out and threatened her, and she promptly caught a ride straight back. Now that's how determined she was. She'd become a major pain in the rear of every company that faced worker organizations simply because she was seen as a little old lady, and killing or torching the property of the elderly would completely destroy the reputation of any company today, let alone back then. In 1899, she slowed down just a bit because she figured that instead of making her fiery speeches to as many crowds as she could, she'd write her message in a book and millions could see it and read it for themselves. So she wrote a book that she published called The New Rights in 1899, and a 2-volume letter of Love and Labor in 1900 and 1901. By then, she was officially known as Mother Jones. Yes, I did say that she slowed down. That didn't mean she stopped. And looking back at history, I don't know how she even called it slowing down. She kept right on agitating, organizing, and protesting. By the early 1900s, she was focusing pretty much exclusively on mine workers, and in and around 1907, she was focused on the Appalachian coal fields of Pennsylvania and West Virginia for a spell. That was until the Paint Creek Cabin Creek strike in West Virginia back in 1912 and 13, which resulted in the deaths of around 50 people and is said to have led to the Matewan Massacre and the Battle of Blair Mountain. That would be when the military, which had been called in to try to restore peace, pounced on and arrested Mother Jones. They charged her in a military tribunal with conspiracy to commit murder. Mother refused to acknowledge the legitimacy of the military court because she wasn't in any kind of a military and wasn't subject to military law. Of course, she was right, but the government didn't care. They convicted her and sentenced her to 20 years anyway. Rather than hauling her off to a prison, they stuffed her in a makeshift prison that was a boarding house owned by one Mrs. Carney. Now, while she was there, the 84-year-old, sharp as a tack and determined union organizer, smuggled a message out, which made it to the halls of Congress, where Senator John Kern of Indiana was trying to start up a congressional investigation into the conditions in the coal fields of southern West Virginia. He created a headache for everybody in government when he read her message out loud right there in the Senate floor. That brought even more attention to the struggles of the miners and Mother's own problem with whatever kind of imprisonment that was supposed to be that she was caught up in. Now that caused such a stink that West Virginia Governor Henry Hatfield commuted her sentence and let her out. Apparently it didn't look good to use military to lock up an elderly lady either. Now the whole thing stunk to high heaven because if she was convicted in a military court, why was she put in a special type of whipped up prison? Especially when she was just exercising her right to protest. Of course, if you look at history, there was a whole lot of shredding of the Constitution happening when President Wilson was in office and hadn't ought to been happening in this country to start with. Yeah, folks, he might have been from Virginia, but he was a real piece of work as far as the U.S. president was concerned. Now, after she got out, she went straight back to Colorado and made a national crusade out of what was called the Ludlow Massacre back in 1914. Yes, folks, the companies were using strike breakers everywhere, and the miners were striking, and it pretty much wound up with dead people all over the place every time they showed up. This time, the National Guard were ordered to get involved and back the strike breakers. Back then, the National Guard received very little training like it does today when it came to that type of thing. Nelson D. Rockefeller was one of the owners who just got back from D.C., where he was testifying before Congress on a hearing about mine safety and mine strikes. I guess he just sat there and denied everything being out of whack and off the wall. So apparently Mother's letter to Senator Kern fluffed enough feathers to get that much done. Mr. Rockefeller was credited with kicking off the 10-day siege where about 1,200 miner camps were attacked and what folks testified as being with machine guns, and burned what was left, leaving around 200 people, most of which were women and children, dead. Now, the wounded numbered near another 1,000. Now, I've seen reports where 20 were killed, but I believe that to be a typo in the initial report that somebody wrote up, and as a result shared it around, and it started showing up all over the place. But if you look at the original reports coming out of there, we find the real numbers, and I'm pretty confident in the number being around 200, and that's accurate, especially if you consider that about 9,000 people were there, and the M1914 8mm Hotchkiss was the machine gun issued to U.S. troops back then. It's a wonder that more weren't mowed down and outright killed. That thing could dump 450 to 600 rounds a minute, depending on the person doing the operating. Mother even took to lobbying President Woodrow Wilson to do something to help. Of course, we who look at history all know that he pretty much was a deadhead on a mop stick when it came to anybody's rights to start with, so that fell on deaf ears. She continued on participating in strikes all over the East Coast between 1915 to 1919, and continued right on with organizing miners well into her 90s. Despite all of her radicalism, Mother Jones didn't support women's liberation movement, or as she called it then, women's suffrage. She said that you don't need to vote to raise hell, and that the women of Colorado had to vote and failed to use it to start with to prevent appalling conditions that led to labor violence. She considered women's suffragists unwitting dupes of class warfare. She did organize women who wanted to help. She'd keep them and support auxiliaries, saying that except for when the union called, a woman's place was in the home. That was a reflection of her Catholic heritage, I believe, folks. She believed that men should be paid well enough so that women could stay home and devote their lives to their children and in motherhood. Just before the Battle of Blair Mountain in August of 1921, we'll actually get into the Battle of Blair Mountain a little more with another episode, but Mother did something that she'd never done before. She opposed the miners' march on Logan County. She told a group of miners over in Mingo County who were all ready to strike and march that the upcoming march would end in widespread bloodshed. She showed them all a document which was telegrams from President Warren Harding offering to end the worst abuses of the mine company owners if they agreed to just go home. Strike leaders doubted that the telegram was real and refused to stop their march. They should have listened. For 5 days, from late August to early September 1921, 13,000 armed coal miners confronted 3,000 lawmen and strikebreakers that called themselves the Logan County Defenders. They were backed by coal mine operators, and that had been happening during the miners' attempt to unionize in southwestern West Virginia coal fields, which wound up raising the tensions between everybody involved. Now, on August 20th, armed miners from all over southwestern West Virginia started marching toward Logan County to strike. On the 25th, there were a few small showdowns and some shots fired. President Warren G. Harding threatened to send in federal troops after a long meeting in Madison, Boone County, and the miners decided to head on home. That's when rumors started circulating that Sheriff Chaffin's men had shot Union supporters just north of Blair Mountain, and that the families had been caught up in the crossfire. That did it. Folks, you ain't seen pissed off until you see a miner who thinks innocent people have been killed trying to support him. They get riled up. My papa dug coal, and when he was a young feller, he told me about it, so I can only imagine. On August the 29th, the poop hit the rotary oscillator, and it was on. True to his word, President Harding sent the army near the towns of Jeffrey and Sharples and Blair. Now, the battle ended after about 1 million shots were fired by both sides. 985 miners were indicted for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory to murder, and treason against the state of West Virginia. Now, the only time that Mother had tried to stop a strike turned into a mess for unions. Membership dropped to 1/5 its size after that battle. Despite it all, Mother still remained active on the labor movements. In 1925, she established her autobiography detailing her life history of championing labor rights. Now, she did that, folks, at 95 years old, while her hand was so mangled from arthritis that she couldn't hardly even hold a pen to write with. Now, toward the end of the 1920s, she moved to Silver Spring, Maryland, where she lived out her days till putting out an article or two every now and then for union publications in support of workers' rights. And Mother Jones passed away on November 30th, 1930 at the age of 100. The name Mother Jones still wears a big pair of shoes in the American labor rights movement and is widely recognized as one of the nation's fiercest labor rights activists who ever lived, and to this day is still known as mother to millions of miners across the whole entire country. Folks, I hope you got something out of our story today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast. If you've been watching on YouTube, Rumble, or even Spotify, throw us a like and don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you watch or listen. Come on over to Appalachian Murder Mystery or Legend Podcast group on Facebook, where we talk Appalachian or about anything else you want to talk about. I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian Murder Mystery or Legend, and I will see you then.